Hello, and my name is Hakon, and welcome back to another little tutorial on the Empress Effects Zoia, the modular patchable synthesizer with the unique grid interface and in a nifty little stomp box. Now, today's tutorial is nothing to do with the effect you can see now. I first thought I'd put that in for fun. Although I could make a tutorial on this as well. It's very easy to do. But today's tutorial is another one on using sequences on the Zoia, because sequences are absolutely amazing on the Zoia once you get past the basic sequencer that it looks like it's got. There are so many flexible options when you combine it with other modules. And today's patch is another way of changing the length of individual notes in a sequence. I did make another patch that did that, but that used a separate sequencer to define a rhythm that didn't necessarily have to match up with the melodic sequencer that you used, which had the added advantage, I think, of meaning that you could create dynamic changes by allowing the notes to have different lengths every time the sequencer played through. Now, this one, on the other hand, has a note length defined on the pad of each sequencer step rather than a separate one defining it. There is a separate sequencer, but that is for interpreting the information of the length and also to actually create the length. Now, I'll just put a link to that first tutorial I had about using a separate sequencer to create the rhythm, which I think is quite an interesting way to do it. And I'll get back to the other one, which I'm showing in this video. Now, before I start, I just want to say that this might not be the easiest way to do this, or the best way to do it, or the most CPU efficient way to do it. But my idea for doing these patches is sometimes just to try to do something in a different way, to inspire, to create perhaps an idea for one of my viewers in how they can do other things on the Zoia, and just a different approach, a different method that can be used in other kinds of problem solving on the Zoia, because the Zoia can do almost anything as long as you can imagine it and as long as there's CPU for it, which of course is the biggest restriction when you think about it. So I'll get started and show you how to do this. I'll just move away from this page with the dynamic lights here. Just switch that off like so. And right, so this patch has 3 pages, 2 pages, and of course there's a reverb that didn't fit on the 2 pages, so that had to go on the 3rd page now. I've got a synthesizer voice that's a little bit more complex than usual. I'll go through that in a moment. Now, this is the main page of the patch, and it has a melodic sequencer up here that, as you can see, runs through its steps in a slightly different step length, different rhythm. So I'm just changing that a little bit now. I'll just show you what this sounds like at the moment. So let's go. So as you can hear, the different steps here on this sequencer have different lengths. And so I'm going to show you how I do that. First, I'll just say a little bit about the synth sound I'm using in this patch, which is a little bit different to my usual one. I've got an oscillator up here. As you can see, it's got 4 pads, and that is because it's a sine wave. It's got FM, frequency modulation, set to on, and duty cycle set to on. And on the frequency modulation input here, it's getting its input from 2 places, from a noise source here, and with a connection strength of minus 42 decibels, and from a second sine wave oscillator here. And also, was there something else? I did not use the... Yeah, so the duty cycle is also adjusted a little bit to change the sound. And that's it really, and that creates a slightly different sound than what I usually make. The output of the oscillator goes into a VCA, which is controlled by this ADSR envelope. You can't see that now because I actually patched it up a little bit differently just so I could switch off the sound from the synthesizer when I was doing my introduction and wanted the animation on the Zoia screen here on the grid. But basically this is patched up together. This is the ADSR envelope here, which is triggered by this gate here. But I'll get back to that because that is part of the main workings of the patch itself. Let's see, and this module we do not need, so let's remove that. Okay. So let's get back to the main part of the patch. So we've got the main sequencer running up here. It has 2 tracks. And the first track now is the one that I've set to define the length of each step. And my idea for this was that it was supposed to be easy to define the length simply by changing it with single clicks. So if you see now, when the encoder here is in note mode, I'll just play this. I'll actually just set them all to the minimum now, just so you can more easily hear. So now all of these are the shortest step length, and it sounds like this. It's quite fast. Okay, so I want to change something up 1 step of length, like so. Goes to every other one now. So 1 click on the encoder is 1 extra step of length. And the reason I wanted to do that was I wanted it to be really quick and easy, and also you can do that, get that physical feedback from the encoder of a click to indicate that you've actually increased it by 1 step. And of course, in order for me to do that easily, I needed 12 different lengths of note length values in order for that to be easy to do. And of course 12 is quite convenient to work with because it's divisible by 3 and by 4, so you can do triplets. I'll show you further how I do that. Right, so this value from the sequencer that is defining the length, I'll just follow the path of that through the patch now. So in order for me to allow this to create 12 different lengths of time from 1 gate to the next of this sequencer, the first thing I do is multiply it by 10. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want this value to control a switch. And before I follow the path, I'll just tell you what a switch does. So the idea is that this is an out switch, which means it takes a single input, which can be dynamically controlled by something else, or in this case, it is set in the module by the encoder to 1, and it has 12 channels. And a switch takes this single input, and it has a channel selector control, And depending on what value that gets, it takes the single input and sends it to one of a number of outputs. I've defined this switch to have 12 outputs. And the way the channel selector works is it takes the value from 0 to 1 and divides by the number of outputs or the number of channels, because an in switch would have a number of inputs rather than outputs, the number of channels, and that tells you the range of control value that selects the certain channels. So 12 outputs, and we take 0 to 1 and divide by 12. That is 1 divided by 12 is 0.0833, which means when the channel selector gets a CV, a control value of 0 to 0.833, the first channel is the one that gets the input. If it gets the value between 0.833 or 0.0833 rather, and 0.166, it will be channel 2, etc., etc. And these channels, each of them is connected to this sequencer here. And this is the sequencer that controls the length that each of the notes of the other sequencer is playing. And it does that in a slightly roundabout way, but I'll get to that in a moment. First, in order for one click on the encoder, so one semitone of value on the sequencer to select a different channel here, with 12 channels, we want basically 1 octave worth of note values on this sequencer to become the whole range of 0 to 1. And we know that 1 octave on the Zoia is from 0 to 0.1. So in order for us to get that from 0 to 0.1 to 0 to 1, we have to multiply the value by 10. So the output of the sequencer here that defines the note length is sent to this value module with a connection strength of 199.9%, which is the same as multiplying by 2. And this one in turn is connected to this value module, which is multiplying by 2.023. And I'll get back to why that is the case. And this one goes into another value module that multiplies by 2.5. So 2 times 2 times 2.5 is the same as 10. And because the connection strength here is a little bit more than 2, it becomes a little bit more than 10. And I'll tell you the reason in a moment. I'll just show you that this here is then the value is connected to the channel selector of this switch. Now, I did say the first channel is selected when the value is between 0 and 0.833. And the lowest note value on the Zoia is 0. So that would select channel 1. And if you go up a semitone, that is 0.0083. And that would still select channel 1 if we multiplied by 10. So we want to multiply by a little bit more than 10 so that that becomes more than 0.083 or 0.083 when you multiply by 10. And thus it selects the next channel. So that is the important thing. It needs to select channel 2, etc. So we multiply by a little bit more than 10. Okay. So each of these channels is connected to a step on this sequencer. Now this sequencer has one channel and it is set to gate. So when you make a sequencer, or when you have an output of a sequencer, you can select different things it can do. So now it's set to gate. If you push the encoder, it can be set to ratchet or CV, but I want it set to gate. And the gate basically just means it has an output value of 0 or 1, and you can push these as push buttons to create a gate. But the first channel of any sequencer can also be controlled dynamically from other modules. Only the first. So when you patch up something to a pad on a sequencer, it changes the value of the first module. So if you see channel 1 here on the switch, it's connected to the first step of this sequencer. Channel 2 is connected to the second step, etc., all the way through the 12 steps of this sequencer. So what we're trying to do is to say that when channel 1 is selected, that is a note value of A0 on the length selection in the first sequencer, we want the length of the note to be one step of this sequencer running through. When it is one click higher, we want it to be twice as long, 2 steps, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 up to when you select the 12th step, you get up to the last one. This one is selected permanently now because I did get a glitch earlier where I was adjusting the different steps, and as I was adjusting while it was playing, it suddenly went to the end and stopped. Of course, it could have been set to loop. I've set it to one shot, but if you set it to loop, it will also work because it will just keep going. So it's probably a good idea to actually set this to I'll just set it to loop, because then it will always work. So either set it to loop or select the last gate. Now this sequencer is did I select this now? Yes, there we are. Okay. When you have a gate sequencer, if you start pushing things on it, it will select the gate. So you have to make sure you unselect them as well. Okay, so the gate input of this sequencer. Oh, one more thing. So this sequencer also has a restart jack set to on. That is also important for this to work properly. So a restart jack is by default off. It needs to be set to on. Okay. Now the gate input here, as you can see, it's going quite quickly. It's connected to this LFO here, which currently is running at 600 beats per minute. It's a normal square LFO, nothing fancy. Oops. And it has the Q start, which means it restarts the whole sequence. Now, so what does this value do? So now every time when you have all zeros of the gate length on the main sequencer, the first pad here is the only one that is active, and that is the length of time it takes from this sequencer to get a gate output here, which is the output of this sequencer. So this gate output here is how we define the length of time. So this runs through until it gets to the active gate, and when that is triggered, this pad here will get a value of 1. That is the output from this sequencer. When this gets a 1, several things happen at once. It sends a gate to the ADSR envelope, so the ADSR is triggered. It sends a signal to the sequencer restart jack, which means that when it gets to the point that is active, it jumps back to the beginning and starts over. So when it gets to the active gate, it goes back and starts over. And it's also connected to the gate input of this sequencer. So the only time that this sequencer advances is when this sequencer has gone through the number of pads needed before it gets to the active gate that is on it. And that gate is selected by the switch. The only gate that is active is the one that corresponds to the switch channel, and that is selected by the CV output from the first channel of this sequencer, which, as we know, is set to be defined by first gate or first step of the timing sequencer is A0, and one step up is the second one, etc. So up to 12. And that is how it works. That is, in a nutshell, how it works. You basically select the length, one of 12 different lengths, and of course anything past, so A0, and then you get up to the longest, which is when you get to A1, it's you're on 12 steps, and anything higher than that is still 12, the maximum length. So that is how it works, and I don't think there's anything else to actually explain about that. That is the whole workings of it. And then you just play it, of course, and you can combine it with other things like scale snap or other means of adjusting sequences. So yeah, I've got lots of other tutorials on that if you want to have a look. But let's play this a little bit now just to see how it sounds. And that's it really. Interesting sound, I think, and just one more way of being able to being able to control the length of time that each note in a sequencer is on, which is a very useful thing, I think. And I'm still going to be working on different ways of controlling sequencers, because I think that is a very important and quite a large subject as well to cover, I think, on the Zoia. And yeah, so I hope you found that useful or inspirational, or something that made you think, or maybe made you realize perhaps a new way of working with the Zoia, something that may be useful to you in some way or fashion for your future patches. If you don't own a Zoia, maybe it inspired you to get one, because it has lots of possibilities. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time for another Zoia tutorial. There will be more, of course. As always, I have lots of ideas, and I've even got a holiday this week, which means I might have more time to patch things up on the Zoia. And I'll be looking forward to seeing you again in my next tutorial, whatever that will be about. I do not know yet. I don't have any concrete plans exactly, but well, maybe I'll do this one. Maybe I'll show you how to just create something as simple as the display responding to the volume of sound. It's a very basic thing, but it's fun to know anyway. So thanks for watching, and goodbye for now. Bye bye.